Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to put together an additional set of tips and tricks for people that are thinking of running in Zizaran's hard mode Path of Exile hardcore solo self-found Gauntlet event that's starting on this coming weekend. Now, so the first video in the series covered getting up to Act 3. That included a couple of real doozies of difficult bosses like the Weaver. This is going to cover the mid-game. Acts 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and I've got to say this is a lot more relaxed. There is nothing like the Weaver in this section at all. Even the very hardest boss, which is probably Yugul, who's an optional boss anyway, you can go back and stomp him much later if you want. Even Yugul is much easier than the Weaver was. However, the final section of the storyline is going to get rough again when we go to Acts 9 and 10 and have to deal with the Depraved Trinity. But let's go through the things that you'll be facing that can be nasty. First up, Act 4. There's a couple of zones that are really easy in normal play. These are the Aqueduct and the Dried Lake. These are much nastier in the Gauntlet environment. The reason for this is that there's a lot of physical damage projectile enemies in there. So these are those archers that fire. There's the Bone Warped archers, I think they're called, in the Dried Lake. There's other archers in the Aqueduct. These are some of the scariest trash monsters in all of Act 4. The reason for this is that they deal physical damage. Physical damage then scales up with the League mods. And additionally, because they're an archer, they're firing their projectiles. They're firing 3 lots, so they're firing one at your character's position, but also ones to either side. This means they will tend to hit a moving target quite often. Before going into these zones, you will want to have a fair amount of your elemental resistances. You don't necessarily need to be 75, 75, 75, although you probably wanted to get there for the Lunaris Temple level 2. All in all, the Aqueduct and the Dried Lake are the same thing as Lunaris 2, but not quite as hard. They do need to be mentioned though, because they're zones that people can easily just underestimate because they're used to them being far easier than they are. Next up, you have the mines and the crystal veins. Nothing really to be worried about in there. I didn't encounter anything really dangerous. You do need to respect the mechanics of the Burning Man encounter, although you don't. This is an optional boss, one you don't need to fight. Of course, when you kill him, he will explode with a tremendous explosion. This will be a one-shot, so make sure you're nowhere near that. But that's standard hardcore. That's a standard hardcore piece of advice, rather than one that's specific to the Gauntlet. Once you've been to the Crystal Veins, you've got to choose between Duresso's Dream and Calm's Dream. I didn't find either side of this particularly hard. Duresso, though, I am very familiar with both the Duresso and the Calm fights. Calm can be somewhat unforgiving. However, the things I want to suggest that you watch out for are actually not the big bosses. So you're probably very familiar with Duresso's moves and Calm's moves if you're an endgame player. You're probably very confident in dodging their big hits. What you might be a bit less experienced with is Triscarati, which is the unique Rakango in Calm's Dream, and the Sapling Grove. So if you're a mapping player, you'll recognize the Sapling Grove as the boss of the volcano map. It's just a whole bunch of totems. When you see the Sapling Grove, run. Do not engage the Sapling Grove. Run straight past it. You don't need to kill it, and you don't want to fight it because it's deadly. Okay, so that covers Calm's side of things. The Calm fight I thought was going to be really difficult, and I actually found it wasn't. I allowed one of his Sunders to hit me to see how much damage it did. It was nowhere near as damaging as I was expecting. You don't need to dodge his leap slams as you would in a normal kill of Calm, and you also need to respect the areas of the zone that fill up with projectiles. So basically, let the projectile spray that's coming in from the edges of the arena push you around the arena. So if the north and I think northwest and northeast thirds of the arena are full of flames being spat out, then fight Calm in the south end. Even if you're a melee build, Calm will come to you. So don't go into those things, but that's just normal hardcore play anyway. Next up, you have the Belly of the Beast. Now, the Belly of the Beast is a little bit more dangerous than you might be expecting. Again, it's the same reason as the Aqueduct and the Dried Lake. Physical projectile-based enemies are dangerous, and there's quite a few of them in there. However, the nasty one, and my pick for the #1 threat posed in Act 4 is actually Malformation Piety. So Piety is an interesting fight in the Gauntlet environment. There's two main reasons for this. The first one is that her projectile that lingers on the battlefield, that projectile, she'll fire 3 of them instead of 1. This means that you can run out of space to fight. Secondly, the fact that there are so many of these projectiles appearing on the arena means that you can lose sight of Piety herself. And this is really bad news because Piety's beam attack is of course still a factor in this event. Thirdly though, and the thing that really caught me off guard in the fight, is that Piety's melee attacks hit like a freight train. This is something that isn't normally noticed in a normal playthrough, because she doesn't have the 20% increased damage, and she doesn't have all of her damage being added as additional of various elements. But her melee attack will chill you, it will ignite you, and it will shock you, and it will do a considerable chunk of your life as damage. Essentially, I suggest that you do not stand in melee range of Piety if you can avoid it, and you also keep up a coward portal. So put a town portal down, jump through it when you start the fight, and Piety will then... Oh, sorry, not so much when you start the fight, but anytime you feel you're losing control of the arena, jump through your coward portal and just wait. Go into town, then come back in with full flasks and just wait. Wait until the arena is clear, and only then do you re-engage Piety. That will help you keep track of her abilities. Lastly, there's the Harvest. The Harvest has Doedre, who can one-shot you. Her attacks are very easy to dodge, but you do need to dodge them. So if you're in the habit of face-tanking Doedre's red balls, do not face-tank Doedre's red balls, because you probably can't in the context of the Gauntlet. Her other the other mini-bosses there seemed pretty reasonable to me, and they do melt really fast. And Malachi has a lot of mechanics and is a genuinely tricky fight, but if you're playing in the Gauntlet, you probably have a lot of experience with him. Jumping to Act 5, this was a breeze. Act 5 was, generally speaking, a breeze. Innocence doesn't scale up much with the map mods. I do need to say one thing about Innocence, and this is a general hardcore tip. It's not specific to the Gauntlet event. When you are fighting Innocence, make sure that you have a portal up. If Innocence uses his "I am your god" special move, where he then drops a projectile that then explodes and into a bullet hell type environment, even if you're very confident that you can dodge the bullet hell, don't try it in hardcore. The reason for that is that whilst you may very well successfully execute a dodge on your screen, you may not have dodged on the actual server, and dodging it on the server is what matters. So for that reason, if you hear "I am your god," then at that point immediately jump through your portal and then re-enter the arena and hold the grace period. Do this even if you are very confident with the mechanics of the bullet hell, and you're very confident that you can dodge it, because the bullet hell will two-shot you, and often getting hit by one means you'll get hit by a second, and it's very easy for you to not be in the exact position on the server that you appear on your screen. Lastly, with Innocence, respect his statues more than you normally do. They're already pretty brutal in softcore, but in hardcore, and especially with the Gauntlet mods, those statues are one-shot machines. Do not let them make a melee attack on you. Of course, you're probably already avoiding that normally, because in softcore you would try to avoid being hit by those as well, but it's just much more important in hardcore. Lastly, Kitava. Kitava is essentially the same fight as normal, except for two things. Firstly, obviously it has the Onslaught mod, and that means that he will, that you have a bit less time to react to his big moves. But more importantly is actually the trash phases. The trash phases against Act 5 Kitava are quite a bit harder than normal. The reason for this is multiple projectiles. Kitava's heralds are the most dangerous trash monsters in the entire game, because they have a very high damage physical projectile, and one that can be lobbed from off screen. For this reason, Kitava, because he summons several Kitava's heralds during the fight, is not a joke encounter. He's fairly dangerous. If you want to get some practice with it though, what I suggest you do is either jump into Heist, Softcore, or maybe even Standard, and grab a bunch of your Belfry maps. Roll them to be really nasty, and just run them on your powerful characters. If your character is actually one-shotting each phase of the Kitava fight, then remove all of the support gems from your main skill, so that it takes you much longer to actually go through those encounters. That'll get you a bit more practice with the Kitava fight. In my opinion, Kitava in Act 5 is not particularly hard, but you do want... It's something that you can make mistakes on, so get some practice with it. Next up we have Act 6. Now, when you jump into Act 6, of course, you're going to suffer your resistance penalty. You are going to want to be addressing this immediately. My suggestion is that you can run the Twilight Strand quite safely with low resist. So do that first. This will then unlock Lily Roth selling all of the gems in the game, and then just go and run, just start running Purity of Elements until you can get rid of it. Purity of Elements will help fix up your resists if they're completely crangled. You will then need to level that Purity of Elements gem, and I would suggest that you do that by jumping into Heist. Grab some of your lower level heists and just run a few of those and get some gear while you're at it. You know, you might get a unique that's useful, but even if you don't, that'll provide quite a lot of gem XP for your Purity of Elements. Get it to level 6 or 7 or so, and then that will undo most of the damage that you've suffered by incurring Kitava's Cruel Affliction. As for other zones here, Twilight Strand is pretty easy. The coast is nowhere near as hard as it is in Act 1, but it's no joke. And so you just want to be a bit careful in there, but you can generally push through it, and there's nothing really important to do there. In the Mudflats, you have one of the most dangerous encounters in Act 6, which is the Dishonored Queen. She's pretty mean even in the normal game. She's one of the hardest encounters in all of the acts, but normally you don't really care if you die to her. First thing I will say about the Mudflats, and I'm saying this from experience having died in there to this mistake, if a Delirium Error spawns there, don't try and maximize it. Just let that one go. Go and kill the Dishonored Queen carefully, but make sure that you are moving very fast out of her fire damage over time areas on the ground. She's mean, but she's not a monster. Karuri Fortress, it was in my opinion pretty easy, although you do need to be familiar with the mechanics of the Tukahama fight. Tukahama is the same fight it normally is. There's a lot more garbage just happening in that fight because the totems are firing out 3 projectiles instead of 1. Some of his totems that he casts. So you will have more projectiles hitting you, but as long as you're not being hit by any of Tukahama's big hits, that should be no problem. The Ridge, be very, 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 very wary around the unique monster Fleetwheel in this zone. So it's one of the Dreadwheel skeletons, and it's really dangerous. Basically, Fleetwheel, you just do not want to engage that fight. Again, it's just one of those monsters that deals a lot of physical damage, and the sort of monster that if he critically strikes you, can probably one-shot you. The Prison is fine, and except of course you've got the Shavronne and Brutus fight at the end of it. That's one you've got to be fairly careful in. Be aware that the Shavronne phases of that are a little bit nastier than they normally would be because she fires 3 projectiles instead of 1. But it's still very manageable. It's not, in my opinion, a very difficult fight. And also, you can probably get away with making slight mistakes in it. Prisoner's Gate is easy except for the god there, Abberath. My suggestion is to come back later on and do Abberath at a later stage in progression. I came back when I was about level 55 or 56 or so, and a good way through Act 7. But it's up to you. Depends on how confident you are with the mechanics of the fight. If you've got a lot of experience with doing tier 16, 8 mod summit maps, then you might be fine to do Abberath a little bit earlier. Western Forest is fine, Riverways is fine, and leads off to the wetlands where you have the Rizlatha. Rizlatha, I was expecting to be really difficult. I came back later for Rizlatha. As it turned out, that wasn't really needed. The key reason it wasn't is because the Vitality Aura is so strong in that fight. Rizlatha, more than almost every other boss in the game, wears you down with damage over time, and Vitality really does neuter that. I did the Rizlatha fight with minus 70% chaos, or maybe not minus 70% chaos resistance, maybe it was minus 50%, and I tested how much damage I was taking by standing in some of her poison pools, and it did not feel all that dangerous at all. So Rizlatha was fine. I would actually feel confident to do the Rizlatha fight at level, but of course, if you've got any doubts at all, come back later. It is hardcore after all. Southern Forest, Cavern of Anger, and the Beacon are all pretty fine. I didn't feel there was anything overly dangerous here. The Beacon might be a little bit nasty, just the part at the end where you've got to where you've got those two very short escort missions where you've got to walk the little bit thing in to power up the flame. I didn't find them particularly difficult, but just be wary of them. Be aware that they're there. Brine King's Reef is a lot nastier. Again, this is a physical archer zone, so you're going to be taking a lot of damage in here. You're going to want to take this one slow. Do not rush into. Do not sort of rush 2 screens forward, then try and kill everything at once, the way that you might in most zones. Here, you're going to want to slowly move forward, sidestep as you go. So you might, let's say that I'm standing here and I want to progress to the top of the screen here. Instead of going like this straight up, you might want to sort of zigzag a little. Imagine that you're a boat in water, and you're trying to sail into the wind directly. You want to do that, just sort of zigzag as you're walking. That will reduce the number of archers that are firing directly at you. Don't zigzag too widely though, because that may cause some of their secondary projectiles to hit you instead. Ultimately, you're going to be fine to take a few hits there, but if your life gets low, you want to just run away. As for the Brine King himself, I don't find that fight very difficult. You just want to avoid his big slam attack, as you know, that's more important than it is in softcore. So when he does his big slam attack, you want to make sure you're not there. A lot of people use a portal to sort of invulnerability phase through his phases where the arena constricts. I don't find that's necessary, but by all means, if it makes you feel more comfortable with the fight, then do so. Okay, so next up we have Act 7. More physical archers in this area, and they're concentrated in a couple of places. Broken Bridge is fine, Crossroads is fine, Belshrine Ruins is fine. The Crypt is not. The Crypt has ethereal knives casters. We've already mentioned in the first video that physical projectiles are scary, and the only thing worse than a physical projectile archer is a physical projectile spellcaster. And there's a lot of ghosts in here that fire ethereal knives at you. You want to be very careful in this zone. If you have incidental minions, this is a zone to use them. If you have Decoy Totem, this is a zone to use Decoy Totem a lot. You want to be really, really careful in this zone. It is perfectly fine to take 15 minutes in this zone, taking fighting carefully at corners and things like that. And it's better to do that than it is to suffer the 4-hour setback of having your character deleted by a bunch of the ethereal knives casters, especially if you get a rare one that has auras on it. Once you've done with the Crypt, you'll pick up Maligaro's map, and then it's... So while you're in there, if you get a telemarketer call you like that, don't give them any information, don't buy anything that they're offering. So we were currently talking about taking Maligaro's map and going forward onwards, and that is to the Chamber of Sins. Chamber of Sins is fine, and then you'll get out of there to Maligaro's Sanctum. Maligaro's Sanctum is pretty dangerous. The trash monsters are scary, and then the Maligaro fight itself, whilst it's mechanically pretty easy, it's also very unforgiving. This is somewhere to be careful. This is somewhere where mistakes, it's very easy not to make mistakes, but it's very punishing if you do. Especially on the fight against Maligaro and the final phase, where he splits up into a whole bunch of sort of mini Maligaros that all fly around everywhere and try and get attacks on you. So, for this fight, I don't think it's particularly difficult, but I would be very careful and don't do this if you're tired. You know, if you're really tired, call it a night, come back and do this fight fresh in the morning. The Den is easy, the Ashen Fields is easy. Ralakesh. Ralakesh is the hardest encounter, in my opinion, in Act 7. Other people will definitely disagree with this. Many people will name Gruthkul. I believe Ralakesh is the most dangerous. You are going to want to have an anti-bleed flask. You'll see here that I've got it on one of my Quicksilvers. You will need to have an anti-bleed flask for this fight. You will also need to be very careful. You cannot face tank Ralakesh / Gruest barrage attack in this fight. Additionally, the Enraptured Direwolf or Hellion or whatever it is at the start, the wolf, is really quite dangerous as well. You will want to play line of sight games. You'll want to have Ralakesh targeting your decoy totem as much as possible. If you do this, you'll prevail in the fight, but it's one that a single mistake can really mess you up. It's really hard to tank Ralakesh's big hits. Once you've done that, Northern Forest and the Dread Thicket are pretty easy. However, the Dread Thicket has Gruthkul's Den. Now, with Gruthkul, if you are not familiar with the mechanics of that fight, then I would suggest you come back later. Come back very, very, very overpowered and just dominate Gruthkul. You know, just overpower the fight and win through sheer force of just killing her in 3 seconds flat. On the flip side, if you are familiar with the mechanics of the fight, the trick here is to make sure that Gruthkul is aggroed on a decoy totem as much as possible, and that decoy totem is not right up against any of the walls of the arena and not in the corners. And you're just doing large circuits around the entire arena. When Gruthkul is not shrieking and has not been shrieking for a while, then you can safely attack her from behind. So if you need to be in close range to attack, then that's when you do it. Next up, you have the Causeway. I didn't find the Causeway particularly difficult. This is a difference of opinion from Zizaran. I know that many of you may have seen Zizaran's similar videos on the topic of these of this league, of this private league and tips for it. I found that the Causeway, the monsters did not do very much damage. The Vile Spitting constructs, even though you can't really dodge their projectiles, you will take a lot of hits in here. They'll be small hits. The Vile City is just a nightmare to navigate as normal, but it's not very difficult. And the Temple of Decay, the Arakali fight is fairly rippy because she has a couple of abilities that are quite scary. You will need some practice with fighting Arakali, and I would suggest that you do Sunken City maps on your heist character, but run them rippy. Run them as 8 mod maps, and just get some experience with the fight when 8 mods are in play. Learn which of the mods are particularly scary, and you'll have no trouble with that fight. For Act 8, so we have the Sarn Ramparts is straightforward, nothing particularly noteworthy at all. Toxic Conduits is an interesting one. I was terrified going into the Doedre fight in practice, and then I didn't find her very difficult. The Vitality Aura was everything that I needed to get me through the Toxic Conduits in general. The bad stuff on the ground, it still hurts you. It does more damage to you per second than Vitality will heal, but Vitality is healing most of the damage, and so you're not really in severe danger when you're standing in goo on the ground, because there's a lot of goo that's hard to see in the Toxic Conduits. Now, for the Doedre fight itself, you do need to be very careful that her red form's physical spear does not hit you. So make sure that when she makes her animation cast that, you're always dodging out of the way. That takes a bit of practice. If you need to just hit the valve, change the form that she's in, beat up on her on a new form, and then just keep changing the valve as frequently as you need to in order to get through the fight. Remember that each time you change the valve, the collection of garbage that's been building up on the floor will be reset. So there'll be more and more bad stuff on the ground that will build up over time. That will reset it. So after we've done the Toxic Conduits and gotten through the Doedre fight, which, like I said, I felt comfortable doing with quite severely negative chaos resistance at the time. I think I may have been minus 25% or something like that. Vitality carried me through it, and just dodging the physical spear projectiles. I then headed to the key, powered through the key, got the quest done there. That was a pretty easy area. Grain Gate was fine, Imperial Fields was fine, Solaris Temple. Really, all of this side of the act was easy. The nastiest zone was the Lunaris Temple. Just like in Act 3, Lunaris Temple was a scary part. And the dangerous thing here, surprisingly, actually was the boss. The boss is the Moon Temple boss, which you probably have a lot of experience with. He scales a lot with the various mechanics. So firstly, he's got 20% action speed, as everything does. But additionally, his barrage attack, which is his most dangerous one, gets the additional projectiles scale that, so they make the individual projectiles within the barrage fire up. He'll fire more of them, but over the same time frame that he normally would. So this means that he is even more of a machine gun than he usually is. You want to be very careful of that barrage attack, and I suggest that you try to keep a decoy totem up on this fight all the time, but have him pointed in one direction, and then you're attacking him from the other one. But you also want to be monitoring your decoy totem's health. He will be killing your decoy totem over and over again, and you want to resummon it as soon as it goes down. And you also want to be watching for any time when he is able to turn on you immediately after killing your decoy totem. Essentially, though, abuse decoy totem and you'll get this fight down. It is the hardest in this act. You'll notice I haven't done Yugul yet. Yugul is one of those fights that the mechanics are, well, the mechanics are tricky to learn, but once you learn them, the fight is reasonably easy. However, one thing that's very tricky with Yugul is just that the amount of damage that comes out of Yugul's charge attack is probably going to be a one-shot in this league. For that reason, I want to come back to Yugul when I'm really powerful and can just butcher him down really quickly. So, you'll then get to the other really difficult fight in this, which is Solaris and Lunaris. There's nothing really to say here other than that these two are nasty. You absolutely must have max resist for this fight, and if you can exceed the resistance's cap somehow, then I would highly recommend finding a way to do so. Additionally, if you can find a way to attack Lunaris, if you can damage Lunaris from a distance, do so, but make sure that you are constantly dodging, because Lunaris' spectral throws are no joke. Solaris, in comparison, is not nearly as dangerous. Solaris does have some pretty powerful attacks, but her attacks, whilst they'll rip through your life, they won't. They'll rip through your hit points pretty quickly, but they won't actually kill you from full life the way that Lunaris' spectral throws can. So respect both of the sisters there. They're both dangerous, and this is a fairly challenging fight to finish off Act 8 with. The last thing that needs to be said is the Labyrinth. So, by this point you will have had access to the normal and the cruel Labyrinth. The Labyrinth is not much harder than it is in the normal game on this league. However, it is harder, and the key difference is that Izaro is able to, when he fires 3 projectiles instead of 1, this doesn't really affect Izaro, but it affects the Goddess of Justice, and the Goddess will fire 3 times as many of her mortars that then get up and become skeletons. This is the dangerous part of the fight, not Izaro himself. The danger is not that these skeletons kill you, it's that you lose control of the arena and Izaro hits you with a massive slam because you're too busy trying to fight off all of these skeletons. That's the danger in the fight, and as long as you're conscious of that, you should be fine with it. However, it does mean that the damage minimums for the Labyrinth are considerably higher than normal. I would suggest that you give the normal Labyrinth an attempt. You can really do it anywhere that you would in normal play, but the Cruel Labyrinth, I did it quite late. I did it midway through Act 9. This was a mistake. You should do it earlier. I think it may actually make a lot of sense to do it before Solaris and Lunaris. Anyways, those are my tips for the mid-game. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you have a good one.